In 1885, blacks in America had been free from slavery for over 20 years. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in Africa, King Leopold II was murdering black people by the millions. So how did that happen, and how did he get away with that? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Okay, first off, who was King Leopold II? As you may have guessed, he was the son of King Leopold I. King Leopold I had 4 kids, one of whom was Leopold II, who eventually succeeded him to the throne. Now, upon becoming king, King Leopold II sat on the throne for about 44 years, which gave him plenty of time to do some of the dastardly deeds and cause a lot of the misery that he did. He had plenty of time to get that done, but eventually he was king no more. He had no legitimate heirs, which is probably a good thing, because they may have been just as greedy, conniving, and devious as their father. So he died without any legitimate male heirs, and the current monarch of Belgium is descended from his nephew, Albert. Now, the extent of the misery that he caused was laid out in a book. This book by Adam Hochschild published a book called King Leopold's Ghost to tell the story of greed, abuse, and even heroism in colonial Africa. Now, in this book, it explored the exploitation of the Congo Free State in depth while it was King Leopold II's own private colony. Specifically, it focused on the years between 1885 and 1908 and the massive amount of atrocities committed during that time. Now, as a side note, isn't it interesting how the name of his private colony was the Congo Free State? Now, it seems that throughout history, everything that is harmful to black people seems to be labeled the exact opposite. It seems that they always have a name that makes it appear as if it's something good for black people, when in reality, it's horrific. In any case, throughout the 1800s on to present day, the power of the European monarchs steadily declined. It's a far cry different than how it used to be when the monarchs had real power. And this decline has been long coming, starting way back, probably before the 1800s, but the 1800s is what we're talking about right now. You know, at one point, the power of the European king was near absolute. That power began to fade, and they sought different ways to expand their power. One way for a European ruler to expand their power, not only their power, but also their wealth, was through colonization. If you think about it, every country that a king would rule has limited resources, limited wealth. But what if we could go somewhere else and take over other people's lands and extract the wealth from there? Wouldn't that make us more powerful? So that's what they began to do. So these European nations extracted the wealth from the nations that they colonized, and they used that to build themselves into these powerful nations of the world that we see today. So the question could be asked, what type of mindset does it take for someone to do that to another set of people? Well, one of the primary aspects of the mentality is that you have to see yourself as superior to them. And if you see yourself as superior to them, then you see what they have as your right. In other words, I have the right to take what you have because I'm better than you. And to be quite honest, isn't that the way of the world? The strong take from the weak. It's that way everywhere. And it's not just a European versus African thing. African tribes did it to each other. European tribes did it to other Europeans. Native American tribes did it to other Native American tribes. That is the nature of man. This is why they say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you have the guns and the firepower, then you have the ability to do what you want. And it really helps when you have other people that will back you up when you do it. So we had this type of thing happening all around the world. But there was something distinctly different about what happened in the Congo that was different than other colonies. You see, other colonies were colonized by countries, colonized by kings and the rulership but it was more of a national thing. In the Congo, King Leopold II managed to colonize that area as his own private colony. So think about that, for instance. Take America, for instance. We vote on things. We have the national interest. We have public opinion, things of that nature. And politicians have to abide by that to an extent. They're kind of limited by what the will of the people will allow them to do. The people can obstruct one man from running rampant. That wasn't the case in the Congo. King Leopold II had absolute rule, and he could do whatever he wanted to do. So what did he do? With the help of a few others, he claimed the territory of the Congo for himself and began to set up his own private form of government. And in the process of doing so, he made a fortune, what was at least over $1 billion of US dollars today. But in that time, if you look at it, it was different in a relative nature because there weren't as many rich people running around. So Africa supplied colonists with ample opportunities. King Leopold II saw his opportunity. And what was that opportunity specifically? Specifically, that opportunity came in the form of rubber. Rubber as a raw material. They had a lot of rubber vines there. And you could extract that raw material and sell it, because now we got people trying to develop bicycles and automobiles and things of that nature. And all of them needed rubber. So if he could extract that rubber, make tons and tons of money. But there was only one problem. Extracting that rubber took a lot of work. And we're not talking about the complex machinery of today. We're talking about manpower. We need manpower. We need hands to actually harvest that rubber. So what did King Leopold do? He recruited some soldiers, had a few soldiers, we call them mercenaries, military men with military experience, white officers that he sent into the country. And the mission was to build an army there. So that army was comprised of a lot of these white officers, some enlisted men. The main part of the army, the leadership, right? So now we need some soldiers. What he did was he recruited individuals from the warlike tribes in the area. So this is what makes this story so interesting. It wasn't like he sent an entire army full of white men in to take control and brutalize the locals. Actually, they were the leadership, and the army consisted largely of black men who he hired as soldiers. So what do we learn from this? What we learn is that all the black men, black people in this area weren't on the same team. And the value system was much like we see today for a lot of these people. Cash rules everything around me. They wanted the money. So if he would pay them, they could work for him and they could be the soldiery in his army. So what was this army called? It was called the Force Publique. So we had the leadership of the white officers. We had the soldiery that was recruited from the warlike individuals in the area. And just a side note about that, that term warlike, when you think about it, warlike tribes, these are the same type of mentality, same type of attitude, same type of people who are responsible for much of the slaves that were transported to the United States during slavery, the Atlantic slave trade, who would dominate other black people and then sell them off into slavery. It wasn't like they were white men that got off the boat and went on shore and went into the jungle and into the interior and snatched up black people, chased them down and dragged them back to the boat and then brought them over to America and the Caribbean and places in Europe for slavery. It didn't work like that. There were other black men that enslaved other black men and sold them into slavery. I think that's a very important footnote. So anyhow, how did we get the rubber harvested? That's what we really want to understand. How do we get the rubber harvested? What motivates people to do the work that's necessary to harvest that rubber? Well, I would offer to you that fear is one of the most powerful motivators on the planet. And that's exactly how they motivated those people in the Congo to harvest that rubber. They would brutalize them. They would whip them. They would beat them. They would scare them to death. And people chose work over death, so they harvested the rubber. And they had quotas. And if you didn't meet that quota, bad things would happen to you or they would happen to your family. For instance, one of the big things that we saw in that time, and there's evidence of it, photos of it, they would chop people's hands off. A couple different reasons for chopping someone's hands off. One, you don't meet the quota, so maybe we'll take your hand off. That'll motivate everybody around you to get the work done. Or two, maybe you care more about your children than you care about yourself. So if you don't make your quota, how about we chop off one of your kids' hands? How about we do that? So you might want to work a little harder. And then number three, a big reason was that ammunition was accounted for to the last bullet. In other words, anytime someone fired a round, they had to prove that they had killed someone. And the way that you prove that you killed someone is you take off a body part and present it in exchange for that bullet. In this case, we're talking about a hand. So, what would happen if you fired at a target and you missed? Well, here's the answer. You still have to account for that bullet. And if the target you fired at got away, you still need a body part, right? So you look to your left and your right and you say, hey, you over there, come here. And you chop their hand off. And then you can take it back, and when you're missing a bullet, you could just present the hand. Now the person's not dead. They still got another good hand to do some work with, right? Okay. And in some cases, maybe that person might not have any hands. Maybe we'll just put some on their back and make them carry it like that. You don't need the hands anyway, right? So this is the type of brutality that was occurring in the Congo. Now, since we're on that subject, I would offer you one other reason why somebody would do something like that, chopping off people's hands and stuff. Remember those warlike tribes I mentioned? And then also those officers and enlisted men from Europe. Were all men. In order to do the job, you had to be violent in nature. But sometimes men have to prove to other men how manly they are. And often we do that in the form of trophies, like a fast car, a big house, a pretty wife. Trophies. These are things that allow us to prove to other men how manly we are. So sometimes you might take a human body part as a trophy. It could be a hand, it could be a head. But this is that type of man's way of proving how manly he really is. I'm a warrior. See this here body part? This is the type of stuff that was happening. Now, eventually, there was government intervention, and not just from the Belgian government, but the international community. There was also instances of interest groups that lobbied against King Leopold II. They lobbied for reform. And eventually, ownership of the area transferred from King Leopold II to the Belgian government, and the Congo Free State became officially a Belgian colony. Now, that doesn't mean that the violence stopped immediately, but it did over time, at least decreased significantly. So what happened to King Leopold II? What type of legacy was left behind? Well, we know that the victor often gets to tell the story. So back in Europe, King Leopold was viewed as a hero. I mean, of course, he brought a lot of money into the economy, was a rich man, and had the ability to tell the story any way that he wanted it told, and other people tell the story on his behalf as if he was a really good guy. There was even a museum created to display how great of a man King Leopold II was. All these things that this European country was able to accomplish, all the good that they did. And even a lot of the light that they brought into this dark continent of Africa. They were able to take these animals and these savages and civilize them. So if you're ever curious, look up the Royal Museum of Central Africa. The Royal Museum for Central Africa. See what pops up and see what you learn about old King Leopold II. So there you have it, folks. That's how one man, King Leopold II, murdered millions, some say as many as 10 million people in the Congo Free State, his own private colony. Love to hear your input in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about old King Leopold II. Let me know about any of the statements or positions that I took on making this video, any opinions that I may have, whether you agree or disagree. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And on that note, take care of yourself, family, and peace.